The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish things aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think, and this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Well, in a new op-ed, a former Sinclair news director explains why he quit. He claims the company was forcing an editorial slant that was far afield from journalism. So joining us now is that man, Aaron Weiss. He was a news director at a local station in the Midwest that was bought by Sinclair Broadcasting Group. Aaron, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Allison. Great to be here.
So you were at a Sinclair station in 2013, or a station that was bought by Sinclair, and you started to see troubling things. Like what?
That's right. Pretty quickly after the acquisition happened, we started getting these must-run pieces that would come down every day from corporate, and they've been well documented.
But what
from
were those?
Many places.
I mean, those must-run pieces, like what was the subject matter of the things that were being forced down your throat to run?
The must-run pieces were generally political. Some of them were pre-produced packages from corporate. Some of them were scripts that anchors were expected to read. And the expectation was that they would be read entirely untouched, without any oversight. And they were of a quality that for me as a news director, I would look at these scripts, and if one of my fresh out of college reporters in Market 147 had brought these scripts to me, I would have sent them back. But corporate expected us to run them untouched.
And they had a conservative slant, correct me if I'm wrong. They often had a conservative slant. And did they have anything to do with your local community, the news you were supposed to be covering?
No, they were entirely national, and they did have a conservative slant. And don't get me wrong, I have no problem with conservative slanted news or liberal slanted news, but own it. The problem with what Sinclair does is they co-opt the credibility that local anchors have built up in their communities over years and decades and use that credibility to promote a political agenda. And that, to me, is what is so ethically inappropriate about what Sinclair does.
So, Aaron, when you saw that promo that we just ran of all of those different local anchors having to say exactly the same script, parroting whatever corporate wanted, what did you think?
My heart broke. My heart broke for the anchors who were forced to do that. I know several of them. And as someone who grew up in the local news business, my mom was an anchor in Tucson, Arizona for 30 years. And I imagined if she had been forced to do something like that when I was a kid and forced to make a decision about her ethics versus feeding her family and keeping a job in a business that she loved, I couldn't imagine doing it. And so my heart goes out to all of those anchors who were forced to basically do it's the equivalent of a proof of life hostage video.
My gosh. And so since you've written the op-ed for Huffington Post where you reveal all of this, I mean, you go public with the sorts of things that were not journalism that you were forced to do, what's been the response?
You know, I've heard from folks all across the industry, colleagues who worked for Sinclair, colleagues at other station groups, all of them uniformly grateful for me saying what I did, because as someone who's now out of the business, I have the freedom to say that now. Who I've not heard from, surprisingly, is anyone still inside Sinclair. They have successfully locked down the company where anyone inside, and we've seen some memos that have been leaked, threatening anyone who dares to speak out to anyone publicly about this.
Oh my gosh. And so what's your advice to the journalists who are still working at Sinclair stations?
I mean, number one, stay strong and hang in there. Many of them are trapped by multi-year contracts that have severe penalties if they try to leave. And we know that Sinclair does enforce those clauses in the contract if they try to leave. And then beyond that, if you do have the opportunity to go work for a station group that respects quality journalism, and having worked for many station groups over the course of my 14 years in local news, Sinclair really is unique. It's the only one that forces journalists to carry the political agenda of its corporate owners. So if that opportunity arises to go work for a station group that respects quality journalism, then you should go do that.
And what's your advice to viewers of Sinclair news stations? What should they know?
my advice to viewers of all local news, find out who the local stations are, find out who owns them. Be on the lookout for commentary pieces. Be on the lookout for national pieces that come down from corporate with a bias. And be aware of what your trusted local anchors, who you might have known for years, if they're now being required to read things that they wouldn't have otherwise, know what you're consuming.
There you go. News literacy, as we say. Aaron Weiss, thank you very much for your candor. It's great to have you on.
Allison, thank you so much for having me.